Hey guys, I wanted to do something new here. I've been playing Magic Gathering for about 20 years, maybe a little bit longer. And there's a format that's been gaining popularity, and it's now the most popular format in Magic Gathering. And it's very approachable for new people to get into the game. But it's also one format that you can really put in a lot of time, money, and knowledge and learn so much about it. Um, and kind of make your own, like, not only deck, but also like your own play style. So what this format is Commander. Commander, you have one um, creature that is your commander, and your whole deck generally synergizes with that creature. I won't get too much into what Commander is. I just have noticed there's a lot of YouTube channels that I love, I follow, that talk about Commander, and I wanted to get a little bit deeper into competitive Commander. Competitive Commander are decks that people consider around like a 8 to 10 power level. The difference between 8 and 10 is rather large. An 8 power level can be achieved by a budget of about anywhere from $50 to $250, depending on the colors and what you're trying to do with it. And you can sneak them out pretty well, where a 10 is generally fully optimized and costs tens of thousands of dollars. That being said, if you are going to be playing Commander, you may face some of these decks, and I want to teach everyone how these competitive Commanders work so that you know what to do when you face them. The first one I want to talk about is Urza Lord High Artificer. He's been out for a little while, but a lot of people play him in both budget decks and in highly competitive decks. He's one of the few commanders that is kind of on that list of potential 10s, and so I wanted to talk about him first. So, what does he do? When Urza Lord High Artificer enters the battlefield, you create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. Basically, you create a 1/1 creature token that gets bigger if you have more artifacts. Your next effect is tap an untapped artifact you control to gain 1 blue mana. This goes past any sort of summoning sickness because it's an ability Urza is doing, not an ability that those creatures or artifacts are doing. And his last ability says you can pay 5 mana, shuffle your library, exile the top card of your library. Until the end of the turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. You can do this multiple times per turn if you have that mana. The reason that he's sitting right next to Hullbreaker Horror is because the most common deck that uses Urza will use Urza as a Polytyrant deck. It's called Polytyrant because you're going to be using a card called Polymorph, and usually the only creature in your deck is a Tyrant. But that Tyrant has the same effect as this Hullbreaker Horror. We're going to skip most of the effects of the Hullbreaker Horror and just read this last line. We'll read 2 lines. Whenever you cast a spell, choose up to 1, and we're going to read the bottom one that says return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So what people generally do in Urza decks is one of 2 combos. One, they will use Polymorph, which says destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated. Its creature's controller reveals cards on their library until they hit a creature card, put that on the battlefield. The only creature in their deck's Hullbreaker Horror, and they'll destroy the construct that's being created by Urza to get Hullbreaker Horror out for free without paying its 7 mana cost, which is rather heavy, even if you could tap untapped artifacts. If you don't have Polymorph and you draw the Hullbreaker Horror, you can still do the tap untap artifacts, but the goal is to kind of do your best to not draw the Hullbreaker Horror, maybe put it back on your library and use the Polymorph to get there. So, how does the Hullbreaker Horror combo work? Well, it works by creating a net positive mana in the cards that you're casting. So whenever you cast a spell, you can return a permanent. So you're going to cast a permanent that gives you more mana back than what it costed. So a mana crypt will cost 0. You add 2 mana. Then if you bounce it to your hand, you can cast it, add 2 more mana, and you're up 4 mana by just doing that. Now, when you cast something, you can't bounce the same thing that you're casting because you cast it, it goes on the stack, you bounce something. So you just need 2 cards. And one of them needs to be either 1 or 0 mana cost with either of these 2 on the top, or a 0 mana cost as Soul Ring, or just any 2 of these cards. You'll now have infinite colorless mana from these. With infinite colorless mana, you go back to Urza, and you can use that infinite mana to use his last effect as many times as you have cards in your deck. You can take your entire library, flip it over onto the exile, and cast any one of those cards to win the game. Now, the win conditions in Urza's deck are a little open or up in the air. Either one. You can use a variety of cards. There's that Jace Planeswalker that says If you have no creatures on the battlefield, or sorry, if you have no cards left in your library and you try to draw the card, you win the game. That's one win condition. There's Millstone, because you can bounce cards infinitely and you have infinite mana. You can play Millstone, tap it to have one person mill a card. You can bounce your Mana Crypt, then play your Mana Crypt, bounce the Millstone, tap for mana, throw the Millstone back on the battlefield, bounce the Mana Crypt, and mill someone for one. It's tedious, but you can mill out the enemies all with those cards. And so let's look at the primer for this deck. The primer was created by a user named Hauntz on Moxfield. So what Hauntz does in his deck is he does a pretty natural one. Only one creature, Hullbreaker Horror. As far as the cards that he's using, he's got mostly draw cards. He's got tutors like Merchant Scroll. He's got Personal Tutor, Polymorph, more draw cards with Ponder, Preordain. We've got Seagate, so you can have as many cards in your hand. We've got Solve the Equation, so that we can find instants. We've got Time Spiral, so that we can grab any cards that we need, throw it back on the library. Time Twister, so we can draw 7 cards. Transmute Artifacts, so we can find the artifacts we need. Windfall, so we can draw more cards. So a bunch of things to draw more cards. Then we have Offer You Can't Refuse. Now, Bribery is kind of interesting. You could take all the creatures from the opposing players' libraries if you want to when you go infinite, but same things. You go through, we have for the instance, it's the same things. It's going to be draw cards, it's going to be tutors, but it's going to be a lot of counter spells, right? Bunch of counter spells. He uses a variety of counter spells. You can use cheaper counter spells if you want to. So a great example would be, instead of mana drain, that's $50, you could just use counter spell. You don't get the extra mana on your turn, but it's the same amount of mana cost. You just would save $50. So if you're ever just trying to build this deck and save some money, there are a lot of cards you can save money on. He does have Dramatic Reversal and Isochron Scepter, which is the second combo that you can go infinite on. And that is basically the way his deck works. As far as the win condition in his version of the deck, I'm not actually 100% sure what he uses for his win condition, but it doesn't really matter too much, because the goal of this is just going to show you how to go infinite reliably. So let's do a play test, and keep in mind, I don't play this deck that often. So if I make any mistakes, and I'm sure I will, that's not really the point, but the goal here is to win by turn 5 on basically every time you're going to play this deck. Because of Mulligan Rules, it's pretty reliable to be able to win. So what are the Mulligan Rules? Right now, Mulligan Rules in Commander is you can mulligan once for free, and every mulligan after that, you will draw 7 cards and throw one of those cards on the bottom of your library. So in this particular hand, we can see there's no mana, so we're just going to simply mulligan the first time, and we're going to go to the second one. We see that there's also only 1 mana. We have an Otawara, and then we have a Winter Orb that could slow down the game, but honestly, it's not looking too great. We could search for a sorcery, but that's all that we could really do. So we would probably want to mulligan one more time. Now we would have to return 1 card to our hand. We have a Soul Ring, a Mox Opal, we have a Chrome Mox, and we have a Grim Monolith. So we actually have, if we play this outright, we actually have this pretty good. You remove a non-artifact, non-land, add 1 color of the imprinted card's cost. So what we would do is we would play this. We would probably get rid of the Pongify. Pongify is good for getting rid of commanders, so we could do that. We could do the Miscast instead if we would like, and keep the Pongify. And so we've got 1 blue mana available here. We can use that to tap a Soul Ring. Now we have 2. We have a Mox Opal, and we have a potential for 3 mana. We're going to use a Soul Ring to get a Grim Monolith out, and we can add 3 colorless mana, and we can add and get our commander out on this turn. Now that we have our commander out on this turn, we can add our construct token, and we have polymorph for next turn. And so what would we do? We're going to, and we would have had to return 1 card to the bottom of the library, so we would actually probably get rid of the Pongify. We'll just throw it on the library and shuffle for now. If we draw the Pongify, then of course we'll come back. So next turn, we've got an island and we've got polymorph. Here's the problem. If we polymorph right now, we actually can't go infinite, because we need to, and this is still tapped, we can't go infinite yet. And the reason why is because even if we get Hullbreaker Horror out, we have to cast 1 spell. So what we'll end up doing on this turn instead is we'll probably just use our mana to untap the Grim Monolith, because there's nothing else that we can really do. We could do that at the end of the enemy's turn, though, as far as I know, right? They didn't add a yeah, no. So what we'll do at the end of turn 2 is we'll untap this with our extra mana, the 2 mana here, 1 mana here, 1 mana here, 1 mana here. And then we go to our turn, and now we have Swan Song. And we can counter something with this, but this is a little unreliable. But we can at least try. So what we would probably do, we probably wouldn't want to do this quite yet, but we could potentially use Urza's effect so that we have that available. We do have 3 mana here. So we would have 4. So we'd have 3, 4, and then we need 5 mana. And we could probably do it. So we would have 1, 2, 3, 4. And we could tap the construct for a 5th mana. So we would probably tap the construct and try it, right? Let's say everyone's tapped out. If everyone's tapped out, we would try to win this turn. If everyone's not tapped out, we would wait 1 more turn. But let's say everyone's tapped out. What we could potentially do is we would float this for mana. We would polymorph. We would sacrifice this. And we would use Urza's effect for 5. But we would do that a little bit later. So with polymorph, we would get out the we'd get out our Hullbreaker Horror. We would cast 1 spell for free. We would bounce the Mox. With the Mox, we would go in and we'd bounce the Grim Monolith. We'd probably bounce the Soul Ring, because Soul Ring and Mox goes infinite. Would have infinite mana, and we won the game. So on turn 3, we won the game. This is kind of a killer hand. So let's restart and show one more time. So, and there's two ways to win here. We could have waited 1 more turn, or if everyone's tapped out, we could do it this turn. So on turn 3, we win the game, or we start controlling the board because we just have such a strong board state. So let's restart and let's do this again. So on this turn, what we have is we have a City of Traders. You can tap for 2 colorless, but if you play a land, you have to sacrifice it. So that's to be the last thing that we cast, the last land that we play. We have a Snow Covered, and we have a Merchant Scroll, which can find us an instant card. We have a Windfall. But overall, I'm not a huge fan of this hand, because we don't have exactly a way to ram to Urza. And we only have the Merchant Scroll, which can find an instant, but we don't have anything to combo with that instant yet, because we already have our Polymorph. And we have nothing that really works with that. We could copy maybe a ramp artifact, but it's just not going to work. So we're going to restart. Now we're on our first mulligan. We have a Mana Crypt. We have an Isochron Scepter. We have Chain of Vapors, Ancient Tomb. I mean, this is a pretty meaty hand. We have the Senseis to look at the top 3 cards of our library, put them back in any order. And so overall, I would say this is a pretty good hand. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is get the Mana Crypt out, get a Snow Covered out, and we'll probably want to get the Sensei's Divining Top. We'll hold up 1 mana for the Spell Pierce, and or the Chain of Vapors, whichever would be necessary, and we can use the extra floating mana to look at the top 3 of the library. So we are going to do view top X, and we'll do top 3. And we can move these in any order. So we have a Seagate, which is a land. We have Dramatic Reversal. We have our Isochron Scepter. So we can actually go infinite. We just need 1 more mana. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the Fabricate up. We'll just... How do I move these around? I've never done this. So we'll close. But what we're going to end up doing is we're going to... Let me just reorder these. So we want the Seagate, and then we want the Dramatic Reversal and the Fabricate. Yeah, let's... We need the Fabricate higher. Okay. So we'll leave it as this. And so this was turn 1, okay? So in turn 2... what we're going to end up doing is we are going to get our Ancient Tomb. We're going to take the 2 damage, and we'll end up doing the Fabricate. And Fabricate, you search your library for an artifact card. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be grabbing, we'll go library, and we're going to grab the Mox. And and we're going to grab, it is the Mox Opal, and it can be played for free. So we'll fabricate, get the Mox Opal out, and then and remember guys, this is turn 2. So in turn 2, we're going to Mana Crypt an Isochron Scepter, and we'll have the Dramatic Reversal, and we'll have Mox Opal to use a Spell Pierce to prevent one person. So we just won the game on turn 2. So we've won the game on turn 3, and we've won the game on turn 2. And if you're wondering how we've won the game, we go infinite mana with Isochron Scepter, because when you play Isochron Scepter, it enters the battlefield, you may exile an instant card with a converted mana cost of 2 or less. We're getting rid of Dramatic Reversal. Then you can pay 2 and tap it. You may copy this exiled card. If you do, you may cast that copy without paying its mana cost. This untaps all non-land permanents you control. What happens is we pay 2 mana, so we're going to pay for the 2 mana with the Mox Opal and the leftover on the floating mana, right? And we're going to tap, and we will use that to untap everything, right? Including this. And then we're going to be up 1 mana. We'll be up 1 color and 2 colorless. I'm pretty sure I timed this out right? Because I did I would be 1 mana short, actually. Because I'm only holding up 1 for the Spell Pierce. So we wouldn't be able to end this turn. It would have to be next turn. Unless like we use the Sensei Top and like found something that we needed. But from my understanding, we should still, because we use the 2 mana to do Isochron, we only have the 1 mana left. So yeah, we wouldn't have won on turn 2. We could win on turn 3. I mean, we could potentially. Yeah, I mean, there is actually a way to still win on this hand. You'd Mox Opal, you'd Chain of Vapors, your Mana Crypt, you'd cast the Mana Crypt for free, and then you would have the extra mana to do it. And then you would go infinite. So that would be the way to go infinite. So yeah, we still win on turn 2. But we would Isochron Scepter, and if they have a counterspell, we would have to use Spell Pierce, and we wouldn't end on turn 2. And if they didn't have a counterspell, we would win on turn 2. Because we would just Chain of Vapors the Mana Crypt and then cast it, and would have the 2 mana to be able to do this. It would untap this, and then we would go infinite. We'd cast Urza, we'd cast everything on the library, and then we would use whatever win conditions in this deck to win the game. So game 1, we won on turn 3. Game 2, we won on, and it was turn 3 to 4, and that's when we won on turn 2 to 3. And so we would restart, and we'd do this again. So in this case, same thing. We've got Gemstone Cavern, any mana based on luck counters, Inventor's Fair. We've got a lot of mana. We have our Hull Break first, so we're just going to naturally just mulligan this one. We've got our Monolith. We've got a lot of ramp. So most likely this is going to be one of those games where we ramp out really quick. We fabricate into something. This actually is a game we would fabricate to the other polymorph. So what's going to happen is we're going to Snow Covered. We're going to get out the mana vault, but we're not going to tap it for mana yet. And then next turn we're going to. Ooh, that's unfortunate. We need to fabricate. So we'll have to fabricate, and we're going to find the. This is a really rough hand. I was expecting this to be a little bit better. I guess we could play this as a land. So what do we have to do? Flip it over, right? Enters the battlefield. You may pay 3 if you don't want it tapped. So yeah, we'll just leave it like this. So we probably could have done instead of that, we'll cast the Grim Monolith instead on turn 2. And so we have both of these out by turn 2, and then what we're gonna do is turn 3. Oh, we can Mystic Tutor. So if we Mystic Tutor, we can find an instant or sorcery. So we can find our polymorph. So we have a potential of 3 mana. We have a potential of 3 mana. So we have 6, 7, 8. We could find polymorph, and we would put it on the top. So what we're probably going to do is put polymorph on the top at the end of the turn. So we would hold up, and we would put polymorph at the end of the turn. But is it worth getting Urza out now? I think it is, because we want to be untapped on our mana. So we're going to get out Urza now. And then at the end of the turn, Once everything goes through, then we'll do the mystical tutor, and we'll find polymorph, and we'll see what that comes out to be. So we're going to view library, polymorph, and we'll just throw it out here, and then we'll throw it on top of the library. And we'll go to turn 4. And on turn 4, and now there's 2 ways to play this. One, we have polymorph, right? This is still tapped. Or I would probably tap the Grim Monolith instead, actually. But we have our construct. So here's what can happen. We can either end the game, or attempt to end the game by polymorphing. That'll take 4 mana, so 1 here, and 1 here. And then we'll have 1 mana afterwards to Pongify, and then we can bounce this, and then we can go infinite. Okay? So if everyone's tapped out, we win the game off of this. If everyone's not tapped out, we could, instead of using polymorph, we could instead go with a Narset and then try for a windfall. Everyone would discard their hands, and then you would draw a new hand, but all of them would only draw 1 card because they can't draw more than 1 card each turn. And so you would draw a brand new hand. Yes, you would lose polymorph off of this, but you would shut down everyone on their team for quite a while. So that's your other option here, is to go with Narset and Windfall, and then you have a brand new hand. So if you think that they have counter spells, you can do that to lock them down, and then it's only a matter of time before you draw any other piece of your combo. Because you also have this where you can look at the top 4 cards and grab whatever you want. And you also have a brand new hand. So let's say that's what happens. And what's going to happen is you'll burn their counterspell if not, right? Because they're not going to let that happen. So you burn their counterspell, and then on the next turn you use polymorph and you win the game. So you're either winning on turn 4 or turn 5. So this is Urza. To kind of come back to this is Urza. If you want to play against Urza, the most important thing would be to stop Urza from being casted. So if you can counter him, it prevents him from getting his creature that he can polymorph. It also prevents him from getting the extra mana from just summoning the Urza. The next thing that you can do is you can stop them from getting the mana ramp cards. In most decks, Mana Vaults, Grim Monolith, Mana Crypt, those are all cards that are good, but they're not like part of the combo. So you probably don't need to deal with them that often. In this, you do. You really need to deal with these cards sooner than later. If you see a Mana Vault and you have a card that's like pay 1, destroy an artifact, it's worth destroying sooner than later. The Construct, it's worth destroying. The Hullbreak Horror, when it gets out, it's going to be hard to deal with. But usually, if you've noticed, I only have just enough cards to combo. And so if you do destroy the Hullbreak Horror, I can cast something that can stop you from destroying the Hullbreak Horror, but then I'm out of mana. And if you notice, every time that I've won, I've been down to like 2 cards. So if you can stop these combos early, you need to try for it. And this is where there's a lot of budget cards that I recommend throwing in any deck. One great example of one is Pyroblast. And what Pyroblast does is pretty straightforward, and I apologize for how far these are. But let's pull up this guy. So there's 2 cards that do this the same way. Pyroblast is one of them. Counter target spell if it's blue, destroy target permanent if it's blue. Every red deck that's going to be playing against a competitive deck should have 2 of these in your deck. And you say, well, how do you have 2? Well, because there's Pyroblast and there's Red Elemental Blast. Both of them are relatively cheap. You can get Pyroblast for about $2. And then there's Red Elemental Blast. And Red Elemental Blast is kind of the same thing. It is a card that says counter target blue spell or destroy target blue permanent. It does the same thing. And again, you can get it for about $2. So if you get both of these are 1 costs that can completely shut down an Urza deck. And you only need to interrupt it once. So you don't interrupt anything that they're tutoring for. You want to interrupt their combos. If you saw what was ending the game, it was generally one of a few cards, right? It was Urza, it was Polymorph, or it was Isochron Scepter. So if you can answer any one of those 3 cards, you're in a really good spot. Destroying artifacts is also really important. So any cards that can destroy artifacts are going to be really valuable against Urza decks, and they're going to be really valuable against a lot of other combo decks too. Hopefully this guy's helped you out. Hopefully this guide has helped you guys out at potentially playing an Urza deck or potentially playing against an Urza deck. And now you know what this competitive deck does, how it plays, and how quick it can win if you play it well. This is true with most CEDH decks. You should be able to win before turn 5, on or before turn 5 consistently. So be very careful about tapping out around turn 4 or 5. I would recommend holding up 1 blue mana or 1 red mana, just at the very least to scare them off from ending the game around these times. Thank you all for watching, and if you like this series or this video, I can turn it into a series and make more videos about how these competitive commander decks work, how to beat them, and potentially how to build them budget. Oh, I forgot to show you guys how to build it budget, but basically, this deck is the only things you really need in this deck are that's expensive is Urza itself. You need tutors, which are generally pretty cheap. Polymorphs, a couple bucks. Merchant Scroll is usually about 10. Most of the blue tutors are about $10. So you're looking at about $40 to $50 worth of tutors. And you need Mana Crypt, you need most of these, which this is where the price is going to come in. If you want to build this deck, the artifacts, which are staples in most decks, are worth having, are going to come out to be about $500. So $500 of artifacts, $50 of tutors. The commander itself is about $50 to $100. A Hullbreak Core is about $10 to $12. So all in all, you could build this deck for $500 to $1,000 as budget. If you're in a play group that allows you to proxy, then you could build it for probably about $200, $100 to $200, and proxying some of the pricey cards. You're playing against this deck. Again, there's a lot of budget cards that answer a lot of this. Anti-artifact, anti-creature, and counter spells are definitely the easiest of them all. And that's it. You build a deck, basically draw power, search power, and you want a mulligan to make sure that you have the ramp and the combo pieces that you need. Thank you all for watching, and feel free to check out my other videos.